Okay, so we're learning Likkutei Sichot, Volume 1 for Parshas Kedoshim. We're on page 243. So what we saw yesterday is that identity cannot be based on things that you have to do anyway. It can't be based on necessity. It has to be done in those things that are permissible, those things that are an option, that you have choice in. That's how you build identity. I was thinking of a lot of different things since we learned yesterday that are examples of how identity is built. But now my mind is blank because I'm too caught up in the other things I'm doing. Okay. The third commandment in the first part of our parsha. There's another thing that needs to be said, that the Medrash writes, and this is, the Ibn Ezra brings this, and the Ramban brings this, and the Chizkuni brings this. There's a lot of people bring this. That, first of all, it was said behakel. It was said when everybody was present. Rashi brings a second Rashi in verse 2. And then the Medrash in Vayikra Rabbah 24:5. I remember all this because I was just doing it half an hour ago. So it brings the parallels between the 10 commandments and the different commandments found in the first part of our parsha. So the fact that Shabbos shows up is not very surprising, because Shabbos is the fourth commandment. Here it's the third commandment that's brought. And now the Rebbe says something that became a center point of his treatment of Torah and science, which was that you cannot accept that you could reinterpret the timeline in Genesis to reflect what science thinks the timeline of creation is. You can't do that. There are those people who want to say that if you just take day, the word day and night, out of its literal meaning in Genesis, so you can say that in general terms, the order of creation in Genesis fits what science thinks today the development of the world was like. The universe, not just the world. But the Rebbe says you can't do that. Why can you not do that? Because the word day literally means day, 24 hours. Now, we don't necessarily mean 24 hours as defined by the sun. The sun doesn't define hours. Okay? The sun is something that reveals 24 hours in our relationship with it. Why does the Rebbe say this? Because he says that the Shabbos is what illustrates our faith in the creation of the world. So we started talking about this yesterday. That if you want to have a relationship with God, you have to believe not only that God runs the world, you also have to believe that He creates the world. There's a big difference between the two. We said that the Greeks had no problem saying, Greek philosophy had no problem saying that the world always existed, and that God is only the driving force, the mover, the one who's moving it. But that doesn't create any kind of relationship. That's not what Avram believed in. Avram's faith was that God created the world. That's what the Medrash says, that first he served the sun, then he served the moon. But they realized there must be something above the two of them, something that created both of them. So the operative word here is creation. So Genesis is the story of creation, and it doesn't, the focus, the most important word in Genesis is Elokim, it's God, 32 times, right, apart from Shabbos. So 32 times that word appears, driving home the idea, the notion that God created the world. Without that, you can't have a relationship with Him. And we said that you can't have a relationship because if you want to be talking to someone who started moving the world 14 billion years ago, what do you care? What does he care from you? What do you care from him? And you're the last event in such a long series of events that he hasn't been involved in since he first moved it, that who cares? There's no relationship. There's nothing going on. If you don't believe that he created it and is continually creating it, as recreating it, as the Baal Shem Tov says, you can't have a relationship. There's no relationship. Who are you talking to? You're talking to the stones. You're talking to the walls. So that's why he says here that the Shabbos has to be understood as literally being, right, 7 days. Every 7 days we do a Shabbos because that designates, that illustrates the world was created in 7 days, days as we know them. Otherwise, what are you testifying to? What does the Shabbos represent? It represents some symbolic thing, which again could be 14 billion years ago, and who cares? There's no relationship. והרי בכך שונים בני ישראל מאומות אחרות, אומות העולם אומרות שהקדוש ברוך הוא מסר את העולם להנהגת הגורמים הטבעיים. And this is how we're different, we've seen this before, from the nations of the world, because we have choice here. And they say that God started the process, but he handed it over to the laws of nature. He's not involved. Azav Hashem et haaretz biyad kochavim u'mazalot. God left the land, meaning he left the earth, he left his involvement in the mundane and the physical universe, and he left it to the stars and constellations, meaning he left it to physical laws. But our faith is such that we connect to God who is above nature. And in fact we're the opposite. We don't take the physical laws into account. Again, there's a limit to what we mean by we don't take it into account, but in general we don't base our calculations on physical laws. It's one of the reasons why Jews are not very good at putting satellites on the moon, right? It's called Genesis. They picked the wrong name. Genesis means that God is in charge. What should you have picked? I should have called it nature. Call it something else. Call it stars and constellations. Beautiful name for a nice little vehicle that's going to drop on the moon. There's all kinds of names. Genesis, you want to call it Genesis? Genesis means you shouldn't be making your calculations based on physics. You should be making your calculations based on prayer. Again, not to say that the physical laws are wrong, but there's somebody running those physical laws. They're not just happening by themselves. So you should have a tefillah sederech, the blessing for a safe journey, etched into the metal of the spaceship on one of the sides. What?
That would have helped.
What?
That would have helped.
That would have helped. That was only if you're going to call it Genesis. This would have helped. Anyway, it's a famous thing that it crashed. Right? It didn't survive the drop onto the moon.
It did get to the moon.
It got close. We don't know how close. Probably got too close. That's the problem. In any case, as it says, "Me'otot hashamayim al techatu yechatu hagoyim mehema." You should not be afraid of the omens of the heavens. Right? In the ancient times, that was how they predicted what would happen. They looked at omens, meaning there was a moon, there was a blood moon, there was this type of moon, that type of moon. This constellation was there, and that star was, and that planet was in that constellation, and so on. And all this, these were omens that told them what would happen. It says Jews should not fear from this. Because this is the difference between Shabbos and the 6 weekdays. Parashat HaBriah, here he says this. פרשת הבריאה מוזכר 32 פעמים שם אלוקים שהוא בגימטריה הטבע. In the story of creation, the word Elokim, God, appears 32 times. And God, in this name, Elokim, equals nature, הטבע. אבל השבת, שבת לשם, היה הווה ויהיה כאחד למעלה מהטבע. But Shabbos is above nature. There's a little bit of a hint here, I don't know if he meant it. Shabbos is 702, right? 702. Shin is 300, and Taf is 400, and Bet is 2. 702. Haya Hove V'yeh is equal to 72. A little bit of a hint, a little bit of a connection. Haya Hove V'yeh means he was, he is, and he will be. He's eternal. So you don't have to worry about the omens.
What do you mean Shabbos is not part of Teva? It's a very natural thing. Once a week, every week, there's a Shabbos. That is Teva. That's how the world is created.
It repeats, that's true, but the Shabbos indicates again that God created the world, that He's above nature. That's why you can take time out. The whole concept of taking time out from the weekdays, from toil, is abnormal. Is abnormal. The non-Jews are not allowed to take time out. Not just because the Torah says so, but because anybody who's normal doesn't take time out. What was the story I heard yesterday?
Why do they take Sunday off?
No. It's a religious thing. You already have to justify it by some kind of religious doctrine. You know, when the kibbutzim started in Israel, in the land of Israel, many years ago, 100 years ago, and then there came a group of, 20 years later came these religious people, and they said, we also want to have a kibbutz. So they said, okay, good idea, okay. And then they said, but we don't work on Shabbos. So they didn't want to accept them into the kibbutz movement. They said, how can you not work on Shabbos? How can you have a day when you don't work? What are you talking about? Work, Stalinist, right? Communism, socialism. That's what kibbutzim were founded on. Work is our lives.
Even Stalinist Russia, they had a day off.
No, they didn't. You had to work every day. Yeah, that's all the story from all the stories of the people who ended up in Siberia. They had to work 7 days a week. What are you talking about? Where'd you get that? They worked all the time. Why? Why should a person? Maybe you take a day off, but it's from time to time. It's because you need to rest or something. It's not every week you take a day off. What is that? In the Middle Ages, they associated the Jews with lethargy. Why? Because they didn't say it was like we took a day off. They said this was a naturally detrimental nature of the Jews is to not want to work. They're lazy. Where did they get this from? Because he said, this is the Middle Ages. Which one of the planets captures or symbolizes laziness? So the thinking is very simple. Which one moves the slowest? Which one of the planets that you can see without a telescope moves the slowest? It's easy. It's the one that's furthest out, right? Because if Mars takes less than a year to make a revolution around the Earth, I think it's less than a year, maybe it's 3 years. I don't remember. Around the Sun, it's I think 3 years. So I'm not sure how long it takes around the Earth, but I think it's about a year. Jupiter takes a lot longer. And
it doesn't mean it's slower.
Yeah, it's slower. You see it move slower in the sky. Which one's the furthest out? Saturn. Saturn is the slowest. And Saturn is what? Saturday. So they associated, they even said, this is why the Jews, that's why they didn't want to do Saturday. They wanted to do Sunday. Because Sunday, it's not because we're lazy. It's on the contrary, it's a lot of light. It's a Sunday. It's connected to the sun. It's all life. So they didn't want the Muslims who took Friday. It's not so surprising either, because who was Friday? Right, Venus. Yeah, Fredag. The English Friday is from the Norwegian or whatever. Frida. Frida was Venus, the goddess of love, but mostly of war. So it's not very surprising that the Muslims took Friday, because they needed one of two things: either they wanted to celebrate war, or they needed a little bit of rest from war. Right? The whole thing with Mecca was that this was a place that they could meet and not fight each other. So they took that as something that's holy, as a time that So this was a big deal, that the Jews were different in this sense, because they are naturally inclined. They're naturally inclined to be lethargic. They're naturally inclined to be lazy. They don't want to work. That's how it's still viewed that way, by the way. So today, in this world, when somebody writes a book, the 4-hour work week, okay, so, these guys take a day off, it's not so terrible. But if you ask Elon Musk, who just bought Twitter for $45 billion, he bought it in the end. So if you ask him, can you take a day off from work? He'll laugh at you. What are you talking about? I actually do something with my life. That's the natural sentiment that a person should have. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's right. That's what the Torah says. Lo yishbotu. They can't rest. They don't have this luxury. The world doesn't have the luxury of taking a day off. So when a Jew takes a day off, it's not just saying I'm going against the grain of the world. It's saying I'm going to connect with the Creator who created the world. That's why I can allow myself to do this. Because if I'm not doing that, if I don't see Shabbos, if I see Shabbos just as a day of rest and not as a day of testifying that God created the world and the laws of the world are in His hands, then I'm missing the whole point of Shabbos. Then it's a big question of what am I doing? I'm not saying go work on Shabbos. I'm saying if you don't understand that, you're missing the whole point. The whole point is that I'm above nature. I'm connecting to what's above nature. So that's what he's saying. The 6 days of the week, they're the laws of nature. They represent the laws of nature. But Shabbos represents the Creator who created nature. השבת ניתנה רק לישראל ולא לאומות העולם. עקום ששבת חייב מידה. That's why Shabbos is the one mitzvah that a non-Jew cannot perform. Right? It's only given to the Jewish people, and a non-Jew who keeps Shabbos is liable for death. כי שייכותם רק לשם אלוקים בגימטריה הטבע ולא לשבת להשם. Because they're only connected to nature. That's how they testify about themselves. The moment you want to say that there's a creator, you have to move out of that frame of reference. You have to convert. זהו גם הרמז הנוסף שבשבת יציאת מצרים, יציאה מכל המיצרים והגבולות של הטבע. That's why we also mention זכר ליציאת מצרים on Shabbos. That it's a memory for the Exodus from Egypt. Why? Because in the Exodus from Egypt, we also went out of all the limitations, the physical limitations. Egypt symbolized the laws of nature. It was a society built on, call it, the logic of the time. So with the beginning of our parsha, we had, first of all, you should be holy, and then you should respect or honor or fear your parents, your mother and your father. And we explained why the mother before the father, because this is all about bringing up the child and changing his identity, forging his identity. Until finally we come to Shabbos. So with Shabbos, which really creates the identity, שמירת האות והקשר בין בני ישראל לבין הקדוש ברוך הוא הנעלה מן הטבע על ידי חיזוק האמונה שבני ישראל אינם נתונים למרות הטבע כי הם מושגחים בהשגחה פרטית שהקדוש ברוך הוא בעצמו. So again, what does Shabbos mean? It means that I create my identity, forging it on the notion that I'm connected to God, the Creator, and not just to nature. And as such, I am under divine providence that is above nature. יוצר אדם בנפשו וכן בנפש ילדיו את קדושים תהיו. That's how you bring to the psyche the awareness that you should be holy, that you should be different. שאף בעניינים הגשמיים תהיה קדושה. That even in the material matters, the mundane matters of life, there should be holiness, we should be set apart. שכן יש לו אמונה איתנה שגם גשמיותו של יהודי קשורה עם קדוש אני. Because he has a firm faith that even in his mundane matters, even in his physical nature, the Jew is connected to God's sanctity. ובמשך הדברים נאמר, and in the continuation of the verses, את שבתותיי תשמור ומקדשי תיראו, שמח שבת למקדש, על ידי שבתותיי תשמור, מביא אדם לידי כך שכל ענייניו יהוו משכן מקדש לא יתברך. And so by keeping Shabbos, you also are building your personal sanctuary for Hashem. Just like the verse says, you should keep my Shabbos and fear my temple. And so by keeping Shabbos, you create like a temple in yourself, which is also, this was all the first part of the separation. Clearly this is all separation, this is all identity. The next thing that we're going to learn tomorrow, God willing, is, I would say, even more important. It's a whole understanding of why this is such an important topic. Somebody even commented on the comment section on the video. why we add more stringencies, why we add chumras. Why do we add more than what the Torah asked us to do? Especially this was true in Pesach. If you haven't done a Pesach with Chassidim, you haven't done a Pesach. You don't understand what Pesach is about. But Shruya is the biggest question in the world. And I've talked about this many times, that the Kotzker Rebbe, one year, they say that he gathered all his top learners, his top scholars, after Tishrei, and he said, you have until Nisan to tell me what the source of Shruya is. Gebracht. What is Gebracht? Where's the source in the Torah? Where is it in the Talmud? Wherever you want, a Medrash, whatever you want. So they came 6 months later and they said, there's no source. He says, that's the answer I wanted to hear. And then he explained why, and we'll explain why tomorrow.
Thursday.
Why Thursday? So we'll learn at 9.
No,
I can't. That's okay. So we'll learn on Thursday.
But I can learn later on Wednesday.
Okay, maybe. Let's talk. At 5, I probably.
Yeah, 5 is good.
Okay, because we need to finish at least the next section.
It's Thursday or Friday.
So it's going to take time. Okay.
Alright, so I'll call you on the way.